Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. I was sent to be an alien queen's food. Now she says, I taste too good to eat. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The impact was violent. Ryan Hale barely had time to brace before his ship tore through the thick jungle canopy, metal screaming as branches snapped like twigs. Smoke filled the cockpit, alarms blaring in his ears. He yanked at the controls trying to soften the descent, but the ship was already doomed. The ground rushed up to meet him, and then pain and pressure, a deep, throbbing ache in his skull. He groaned, forcing his eyes open, but the world was still spinning. His hands trembled as he undid his harness, pushing against the warped metal of the control panel. The cabin was caved in on one side, sparks jumping from exposed wires, and the stench of burning fuel clung to the air. He coughed, forcing himself upright, muscles protesting with every movement. Survival instincts kicked in, first priority, check for weapons. His blaster was strapped to his thigh, a small mercy. Second priority, assess the environment. The jungle beyond the shattered windshield was a sea of bioluminescent foliage pooling with eerie blue light. Strange, twisting trees reached toward the sky, their leaves shifting color in the dim haze. The planet was supposed to be uninhabited, a dead world orbiting the fringes of map space, but clearly that had been a lie. The sensors had gone haywire the moment he'd hit the atmosphere, detecting something massive before cutting out entirely. Something had shot him down, something alive. A rustle, a shadow. Ryan turned, hand flying to his weapon. He saw movement in the trees, tall figures, nearly twice his height, slipping through the dense undergrowth with unsettling grace. They were watching him, waiting predators. He backed up instinctively, but there was nowhere to run. The ship was a smoking ruin, and the jungle stretched endlessly in every direction. His pulse pounded in his ears as he tightened his grip on the blaster. He needed to think fast. Then they attacked. They moved in unison, a blur of motion. He fired on instinct, but they were faster, ducking and weaving between the glowing plants. One leapt onto the wreckage, her sharp claws raking across the hull as she lunged. Ryan twisted away, but another was already behind him. A powerful arm slammed into his chest, knocking the air from his lungs. He hit the ground hard, his weapon flying from his grasp. He tried to roll to scramble back to his feet, but a heavy foot pressed down on his chest, pinning him with effortless strength. The alien above him was breathtaking in the worst possible way. Blue skin shimmered under the jungle's bioluminescence, muscles rippling beneath an intricate layer of gold-threaded armor. Her red eyes glowed like embers, pupils narrowing to slits as she bared her fangs. A long, sinuous tail flicked behind her, curling in amusement. As she studied him, she tilted her head and spoke in a language that sent a chill down his spine. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was enjoying this. More figures closed in. They were all female, towering over him, their sharp teeth flashing in the low light, their bodies powerfully built for speed and violence. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and hunger. He'd been around long enough to recognize the look of a species that saw humans as nothing more than prey. One of them spoke again, her voice lilting, almost musical. The others responded with laughter, a sound that made his stomach twist. He was being mocked. Ryan clenched his jaw, forcing his breathing to steady. He wasn't going to die like this. He had fought his way out of worse situations before, even when outnumbered and outgunned. But as he shifted his weight, trying to find an opening, the pressure on his chest increased. The alien pinning him leaned closer, her glowing eyes narrowing in amusement. She was toying with him. Then, without warning, they dragged him upright, binding his wrists behind his back with something that pulsed against his skin, almost alive. The restraints coiled tight, restricting even the slightest movement. He struggled, but the bindings only tightened in response. The lead alien, clearly their commander, grinned at his resistance, then turned and began leading him deeper into the jungle. They moved fast. Ryan was half-dragged, half-forced to keep pace as the jungle blurred past him. The glowing plants pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, shifting colors as they moved. He couldn't tell if it was some form of bioluminescence or something else entirely. His mind raced through possibilities. He needed an escape plan. They emerged into a clearing, and Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The temple loomed before him, an impossible structure of black stone and golden light rising from the jungle like a fortress. Carved pillars stretched skyward, etched with symbols that flickered like fire. The massive doors parted with a deep, resonating hum, revealing a throne room bathed in warm, flickering torchlight, and at the center of it all, seated on a massive obsidian throne, was her. She was different from the others, more imposing, her presence alone commanding absolute attention. Zara, he thought. He didn't need an introduction to know who she was. Her red eyes locked on him the moment he entered, gleaming with dark amusement, her fangs flashing in a slow, deliberate smile, and Ryan's stomach twisted. She rose with an effortless grace, her tail curling behind her as she descended the steps of her throne. The warriors surrounding him stepped back, bowing their heads as she approached. She was taller than the others, more dangerous in a way that went beyond physical strength. Power radiated from her like heat. She stopped mere inches from him, her glowing eyes drinking him in slowly, deliberately. She reached out, her sharp nails tracing down his cheek, his jaw, his throat. He held his breath, refusing to flinch as her claws rested against his pulse. Then she leaned in, her lips parting just enough for him to see the razor-sharp fangs beneath. Before he could react, her tongue flicked out, running along the side of his neck. A shock raced through his spine, every muscle locked in place, and a sharp, shuddering breath escaped him as she pulled back, her eyes wide, her entire body trembling for a single breathless moment. The room fell silent. Then Zara let out a slow, purring laugh. "No," she murmured in a sultry whisper, "you taste far too delicious to waste." Her tail curled around his waist, tightening possessively. A dark smile played at her lips as she tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I think," she purred, "I'll keep you instead." And just like that, Ryan realized he had traded one kind of death for something far more dangerous. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as Zara's words echoed through the golden-lit temple. The warriors who had dragged him here stood in stunned silence, exchanging quick glances, their postures shifting uneasily. He wasn't supposed to be spared. He had seen the hunger in their eyes, felt the sharp press of their claws, knew what his fate was meant to be the moment they had captured him. Yet here he stood, still breathing, still whole, and now shackled to a fate even more uncertain than death. Zara took her time inspecting him, her fingers trailing along his chest with an unsettling mix of amusement and calculation. She wasn't just looking at him. She was studying him, assessing every reaction, every flicker of emotion that crossed his face. Her red eyes gleamed with something deeper than hunger, now something far more dangerous. He wasn't sure what was worse, being a meal or being of interest. Her tail curled tighter around his waist, its smooth scales pressing against his skin, as she leaned in just enough for him to catch the faint, intoxicating scent of something rich and otherworldly clinging to her. "I wonder," she mused, her voice smooth and lilting, as if she were speaking to herself more than him. "What makes you different? Why do you taste like this?" She ran a single, sharp nail along the side of his throat, pressing just enough to make his pulse jump beneath her touch. She grinned at that, her fangs glinting in the firelight. "Perhaps I should take my time figuring it out." Ryan forced himself to meet her gaze, locking eyes with the alien queen who had just claimed him like a prize. He needed to play this carefully. He had no idea what she intended, but she was keeping him alive, which meant there was an opening, a way to turn the situation to his advantage. If he could get her talking, if he could learn why she had chosen to keep him, then maybe he could find a way to escape. He swallowed back his initial instinct to spit out something sharp and defiant, a tactic that might have worked with human captors, but Zara wasn't human. If he wanted to survive, he had to be useful. "If I'm not food," he said, forcing his voice to stay level, "then what am I?" Zara let out a soft, amused hum, tilting her head as if she hadn't considered the question until now. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension, before she finally spoke. "Mine," she said simply, as if the answer were obvious. The warriors in the temple shifted again, unease rippling through the gathered crowd. He wasn't sure if they were more disturbed by the fact that their queen had spared him or by the possessiveness in her tone. Either way, the air in the room had changed. He could feel it humming beneath the surface like an electric current. Before he could push for more, Zara turned away from him, flicking her tail in a silent command. The warriors hesitated for only a moment before obeying, stepping back and dispersing, though he could feel their lingering stares burning into him as they left the chamber. Only two remained behind, standing at attention near the throne, their postures rigid. Zara paid them no mind, her focus entirely on Ryan, as she walked toward the raised platform at the center of the room where an opulent darkstone lounge was draped in fine, flowing silks. With a lazy grace, she settled herself into the cushions, reclining like a predator watching its next meal struggle in its final moments. "Well," she said, gesturing for him to follow. Come here. Ryan hesitated, but the alternative was staying where he was and waiting for her to change her mind. He took a cautious step forward, his bindings still tight around his wrists. The material flexed with his movement, shifting unnaturally against his skin. He hated not knowing what it was or what it did, but he couldn't focus on that now. He had to keep moving. When he reached the base of the platform, he stopped standing stiffly as Zara's gaze traveled over him again. She studied him like a scientist dissecting an unknown specimen, her tail flicking absently across the cushions. Then, without warning, she reached out and pulled him onto the lounge beside her. The strength in her grip was effortless. He barely had time to react before he found himself sprawled against the cushions, her tail winding lazily around his legs, keeping him in place. He tensed instinctively, but she didn't tighten her hold. Instead, she leaned closer, propping her chin in her hand as she regarded him with something that almost resembled amusement. "Your tent," she observed, trailing a single nail down his arm. "Relax." Ryan let out a dry, humorless chuckle, arching a brow. "Hard to relax when I was almost dinner 5 minutes ago." Zara smirked, unbothered. "Would you have preferred that I didn't dignify that with an answer?" She seemed to find his silence entertaining. She shifted slightly, her tail curling more securely around his ankle before she spoke again. "Your kind isn't common in this part of the galaxy," she mused. "Most humans avoid our territory, but you fell right into my hands. A gift." Her gaze flickered with a challenge dancing behind her eyes. "I wonder if you were meant to be mine." Ryan clenched his jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. "I'm here because I was shot down," he said evenly, "and I'd like to know by who." Zara's smirk deepened. "You're quick," she said, amusement lacing her tone. "And bold for someone in your position. I like that." She leaned in, her face dangerously close now, her breath warm against his skin. "But you ask the wrong questions. You should be asking why I spared you, why I haven't let my warriors tear you apart like they were expecting me to." His pulse pounded in his throat. He hated how easily she could read him, how much control she had in this situation. But he wasn't about to play her game without gaining something in return. "Fine," he said carefully. "Why did you spare me?" A silence stretched, dragging out the moment just long enough to test his patience. Then slowly she leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of his ear as she whispered, "Because I want to." The weight of her words sank into his bones. She wasn't just toying with him. She wasn't playing some simple game of dominance. She had chosen him, and for a reason she wasn't yet revealing. That was what unsettled him the most. Before he could respond, she pulled back. A satisfied gleam appeared in her eyes. "You'll stay here," she said, stretching lazily against the cushions. "I'll decide what to do with you later. For now, consider yourself lucky." Ryan watched her, his mind racing. She had given him no clear answers, no real indication of what came next, but one thing was certain. He was alive for now, and if he wanted to keep it that way, he had to figure out why. As he sat there bound and trapped in a throne room that smelled of fire and silk, with a queen who had spared him for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend, one thought clawed at the back of his mind. He had escaped death, but had he just stepped into something even more dangerous? The golden light of the temple cast long shadows against the black stone, flickering against the lavish silks draped around the throne room. The warmth of the torches should have been comforting, but Ryan felt none of it. He sat stiffly, wrists still bound behind his back, his skin prickling under Zara's piercing gaze. She had positioned herself close, her tail lazily wrapped around his ankle like a chain, keeping him exactly where she wanted. He had no idea what she intended to do with him, and that uncertainty was starting to eat away at his patience. He glanced at the guards stationed near the entrance. Their expressions were unreadable, their postures rigid. They hadn't so much as twitched since Zara had claimed him, and that only deepened the unease curling in his gut. He wasn't just some passing curiosity. He was hers now, at least in their eyes, and that meant he was trapped in a game he didn't understand. Zara let the silence stretch, her red eyes gleaming as she traced a single clawed finger down the length of his arm. Her touch was slow and deliberate, testing him, playing with him, enjoying the way his muscles tensed beneath her fingertips. "You're quiet," she finally mused, her voice thick with amusement. "Not protesting your situation anymore?" Ryan exhaled sharply, leveling her with a look. "Would it make a difference?" he asked, a hint of defiance in his tone. "No," she admitted, tilting her head. "But I do enjoy a little resistance. It makes things more exciting." His jaw tightened. She was baiting him, seeing how much she could push before he snapped. He had dealt with manipulative leaders before, smooth-talking diplomats, warlords who used power as a weapon, commanders who thrived on psychological warfare. Zara was all of those things wrapped in an alien body that moved like liquid shadow. Her every word dripped with control. If he let her, she would twist him into whatever shape she wanted. But he wasn't about to make it that easy. "I'm not here to entertain you," he said, shifting against the restraints to test their give. They didn't budge. "If you're keeping me alive, I want to know why. I don't believe for a second it's just because I taste good." Zara chuckled, a deep, rolling sound that sent a shiver down his spine. "Oh, but you do taste good," she murmured, trailing her fingers higher until they brushed the side of his throat. "You humans are rare. Your kind has crossed paths with ours before, but never like this." She let her claws graze his skin, her smirk widening when he refused to flinch. "Most humans we find are weak, frail. You, however—" Her gaze dragged over him slowly and appraisingly. "You're different." Ryan forced himself to hold her gaze, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of seeing him squirm. "Different how?" he asked. Zara's expression shifted just slightly. Something thoughtful flickered in her eyes, something calculating. "Your scent," she said at last. "Your blood, your presence, there's something about you that calls to me." She leaned in, inhaling deeply, her eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second before snapping open again. "It's not just hunger, it's something more." Ryan clenched his jaw. He didn't know whether to be disturbed or intrigued, but the way she spoke made his skin prickle. He wasn't just a plaything to her, he was a puzzle, something she was determined to figure out, and that was dangerous. He shifted again, trying to move his hands, but the bindings were still tight, pooling against his skin. "These restraints," he said carefully, "are they alive or something?" Zara's lips curled in amusement. "You're observant," she said, lifting his arm to inspect the dark, seni material coiled around his wrists. "They respond to strength, tightening when you resist. If you relax, they loosen." She ran her fingers along the restraints, and as if obeying her touch, they slackened just slightly. "I could remove them," she said idly, tracing slow circles against his forearm. "But why would I do that?" Ryan exhaled slowly, forcing his mind to stay clear. "Because if you want answers about me, you need me to talk," he said evenly, "and I'm not going to say a damn thing while I'm tied up like this." Zara studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words, then let out a thoughtful hum. "You're not wrong," she admitted, tilting her head, "but you assume I need your words." She shifted closer, her breath ghosting against his jaw. "I learned just as much from the way you react." Her fingers trailed lower over the pulse point in his wrist, over the restrained tension in his muscles. She was testing him again, waiting to see how much he would allow. He forced himself to remain still, refusing to give her the reaction she was looking for. After a moment, Zara let out a quiet sigh, withdrawing her hand. "Very well," she murmured. With a flick of her fingers, the restraints loosened, unraveling from his wrists like tendrils of smoke. The moment they fell away, Ryan flexed his hands and rubbed the raw skin beneath. He resisted the urge to stretch too obviously, keeping his movements controlled. He wasn't stupid. Just because she had freed him didn't mean she wouldn't restrain him again at the slightest provocation. Zara leaned back against the cushions, watching him with amusement. "There," she said, "now you can talk. So tell me, Captain Ryan Hale, where did you come from?" Ryan rolled his shoulders, finally feeling some of the tension ease from his body. "A research vessel," he said evenly. "I was on a scouting mission, gathering data on uncharted planets." Zara raised a brow. "Uncharted planets?" she echoed, a knowing smirk playing at her lips. "And yet you found this one." Ryan met her gaze. "I didn't find this planet," he corrected. "It found me." Zara's smirk faltered just slightly, and Ryan knew he had struck a nerve. For the first time, he saw something flicker in her expression, something close to concern. It was brief, barely there, but he caught it. That meant something. She knew what had brought him here. She knew, and she wasn't telling him. "Tell me," he pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Who shot me down?" Zara's tail twitched, her expression shifted back into something unreadable. "You ask too many questions," she murmured with amusement. "Returning to your tone, Ryan, you don't back down, and you're avoiding the answer." Zara regarded him for a long moment, then let out a slow, deliberate sigh. "Perhaps," she admitted, "but some things are better left unknown." Captain Ryan Hale's pulse quickened. He had suspected she was playing games before, but now he was sure of it. She wasn't just keeping him for her own amusement. She was keeping him because something had brought him here, something that worried her. And for the first time since his capture, Ryan realized that whatever had shot him down hadn't just been a random attack. It had been a trap. He sat still, his body tense, as Zara's words settled between them. Something in her tone confirmed his suspicions. He hadn't crashed here by accident, he had been lured. The weight of that realization pressed against his ribs, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. Zara was watching him closely, studying his reaction, as if she expected him to fall apart under the weight of her revelation. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. If she thought he was just some lost human someone she could toy with until she got bored, she was going to be disappointed. He had survived worse, but even as he steadied himself, his mind raced. If this planet had been a trap, then who had set it? Zara, her people, or something else entirely? The jungle world had no known ties to human colonies. He had checked the charts before his mission. The idea that something out here had anticipated his arrival made his stomach twist. If this was a setup, then that meant someone somewhere had been waiting for him to make a mistake, and he had walked right into it. Zara shifted beside him, stretching lazily against the silk-covered lounge, her tail flicking in idle amusement. "You're thinking very hard," she mused, tilting her head. "That's dangerous in a place like this." Ryan exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to focus. "And why is that?" he asked. She smiled slowly and knowingly. "Because the more you understand, the more you'll realize how little control you actually have." Her voice was rich with amusement, but beneath it there was something else, something colder. She wasn't just playing games, she was warning him, and that made him uneasy. Ryan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, careful not to move too quickly. He had been untied, but he knew better than to think that meant he was free. If anything, Zara's decision to release him was more unnerving than the restraints. It meant she wasn't worried about him running, which meant she was confident he couldn't. "I don't like being kept in the dark," he said carefully, watching her expression. "If I'm here because someone wanted me here, I need to know who." Zara studied him for a long moment, as if debating how much to tell him. Then with a slow exhale, she leaned back against the cushions, one hand resting against the hilt of a dagger strapped to her thigh. "You humans think you own the stars," she murmured, her gaze distant. "You send your little ships into the black, thinking you are the first to walk these paths, but you are not. There are forces out here far older than you, far hungrier, and sometimes they take an interest." Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. "So I was bait?" he asked. Zara's red eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Perhaps," she said softly, "or perhaps you are simply unlucky." Ryan clenched his jaw. She was still dancing around the truth, and that meant she was hiding something. But what? He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "If something wanted me here," he said, "what do you get out of keeping me?" Zara's smirk returned, sharp and deliberate. "Oh, that's simple," she purred, reaching out to trail her claws down his arm again. "You intrigue me." Ryan stiffened as her fingers traced over his pulse, lingering just long enough to make him feel her warmth. Her tail tightened slightly around his ankle, a silent reminder of her control. She was testing him again, waiting for a reaction, but he refused to give her one. "I'm not a toy," he said, keeping his voice level. Zara chuckled. "No," she agreed. "You are something much more interesting than that." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Most humans in your situation would have begged by now, some would have tried to fight. You're playing the long game, I like that." Ryan forced himself to hold her gaze. "And what happens when I stop being interesting?" he asked. Zara's smirk widened, but there was something else in her expression now, something thoughtful. "That," she murmured, "is what we are both going to find out." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical thing. Ryan didn't move, he didn't speak. He needed time to process this, to figure out just how deep this situation really went. He had assumed Zara was just another warlord, another powerful ruler with too much arrogance and too many weapons. But now he was beginning to realize the truth. She wasn't just powerful, she was curious, and that was far more dangerous. She wasn't keeping him as a prisoner. She was keeping him as an experiment, and the worst part was he had no idea what kind of experiment he was supposed to be. Zara stretched again as if sensing the shift in his thoughts. "You'll be staying in my quarters," she said casually, as if it were an afterthought. "I'd hate for my warriors to get any ideas." Ryan tensed. "And if I refuse," her red eyes flashed, her smirk turning predator-like. "Then I suppose I could reconsider eating you," he exhaled sharply. "Right." She laughed, genuinely amused, and for a moment she almost seemed normal. But then the moment passed, and she was the predator once more, watching him with the kind of interest that sent a cold shiver down his spine. She rose from her seat, her tail finally uncoiling from his ankle as she gestured toward the far side of the chamber. "Come," she said. "It's been a long night. You should rest." Ryan didn't move immediately. He knew there was no real choice here, no real freedom. But he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to be her pet, not now, not ever. So as he stood and followed her deeper into the golden-lit temple, he made himself a silent promise. He would find a way out of this, no matter what it took. Ryan walked in measured steps, forcing himself to keep his breathing steady as he followed Zara through the winding corridors of the temple. The walls shimmered with golden light, casting flickering shadows along the polished stone. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The distant murmur of the warriors faded into an oppressive silence. He had expected to be thrown into a cell, kept under heavy guard, maybe even paraded around as some strange trophy. But instead, Zara was leading him to her own chambers. The weight of that realization settled in his stomach like a stone, though he kept his expression unreadable, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much it unsettled him. A passage opened into a grand chamber, and Ryan barely concealed his surprise at what he saw. It was nothing like what he had expected from a war-hungry predator queen. The room was vast, lined with silk and drapes that hung from the ceiling, their fabric shifting in the faint breeze that drifted through unseen vents. Strange, floating lanterns cast a soft, golden glow, illuminating the sleek black stone of the floor. The bed, if it could even be called that, nestled within a massive, raised platform of cushions. Everything in the space was both opulent and eerily intimate, a stark contrast to the sharp, brutal exterior of the rest of the temple. Zara strode forward without hesitation, her presence filling the room as if she had absorbed every inch of space within it. She moved with the ease of someone entirely in control, entirely aware of her own power. Ryan felt her tail brush against him briefly as she passed, and he forced himself to stay still, his muscles tensing at the contact. She knew exactly what she was doing, testing boundaries, keeping him on edge. She turned, her glowing red eyes locking onto him. "You will stay here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that was not open for debate. "You are not a prisoner, not exactly, but you will not leave unless I allow it." She smirked lightly, as if amused by the thought of him even attempting an escape. Ryan exhaled through his nose, scanning the room once more before meeting her gaze. "And what am I supposed to do here? Lounge around like some pet, waiting for you to decide what to do with me?" His tone was even, but the frustration simmered beneath it. Zara tilted her head as if considering his words carefully. "If you wish," she said after a pause, "I imagine you'll grow restless before long." She stepped closer, uncomfortably close, her tail curling slightly around one of the thick bedposts as she regarded him. "You intrigue me, Ryan Hale. That alone has bought you more freedom than most, but do not mistake intrigue for mercy." Ryan held her gaze unflinchingly. "I'm not looking for mercy," he said, his voice firm. "I'm looking for answers." Zara let out a soft, thoughtful hum, amusement flickering in her eyes. "And yet you do not demand them," she mused. "You do not beg. Most would be groveling by now, pleading to be sent home." She leaned in slightly, her breath warm against his skin. "But you are waiting, watching. That makes you interesting." Ryan resisted the urge to step back, refusing to let her see that she was getting to him. "I don't play games," he said evenly. Zara smiled slowly and knowingly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ryan could feel the heat of her body radiating against him, the subtle shift in her posture, the way her tail flicked lazily against the floor. She was testing him, measuring him, seeing how much she could push before he snapped, but he wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Finally, she let out a low, amused sigh and pulled away, turning toward a sleek, polished table near the edge of the chamber. "You are not bound," she said casually, running a clawed fingertip along the surface. "You may move freely within these walls." She glanced over her shoulder, her red eyes gleaming. "But do not mistake that for permission to leave." Ryan watched her carefully, his mind already working through every possible scenario. Escape was going to be difficult, if not impossible. The temple was guarded, the planet itself a mystery. He had no weapons, no allies, no clear understanding of what he was up against. But he wouldn't sit idly by waiting for her to decide his fate. He needed to find leverage, something he could use to turn the situation in his favor.